The Quorites had always believed in their superiority. They stood aboard their immense flagship, looking down on Earth as if it were an insect beneath their heel. Their technology was unmatched in the galaxy: plasma shields, quantum teleportation, and instantaneous communication across light years. Earth was nothing more than a backwater planet with outdated tech, primitive in every way that mattered. "Send the message," the lead commander ordered, his voice as cold as the dark void outside their ship. A transmission shot down to Earth, an offer of surrender. Quorite protocol dictated that they offer mercy to weaker species before annihilation. They were civilized, after all. The response came minutes later, a signal too simple for the Quorites to understand. The humans had acknowledged their threat, but their lack of desperation puzzled the Quorite leaders. "What are they preparing?" asked one of the tactical officers, his fingers brushing holographic panels, monitoring Earth's activities. The commander's eyes narrowed. Reports began filtering in. Strange images of human military preparations flashed before them: ballistic missiles, tanks, outdated fighter jets. The Quorites scoffed. "Surely, they don't expect to use those?" one officer chuckled, shaking his head in disbelief. The commander stepped closer, studying the screens. These were not the weapons of a species capable of fighting back against them. They had encountered countless civilizations in their time, each one more advanced than Earth, and each one crumbled beneath their superior firepower. The fact that humans still relied on crude, physical weaponry was laughable. "Pathetic," the commander muttered. "They haven't even developed plasma-based arms." The crew exchanged amused glances. This battle would be over before it began. To think that Earth would resort to launching solid projectiles at their shields, a tactic so outdated that even mentioning it seemed ludicrous. But there was an unease that the commander couldn't shake. As the hours passed, intelligence from their drones on Earth's surface kept returning with the same disturbing truth: these primitive weapons weren't a sign of desperation. They were deliberate. "They must be foolish," another officer stated confidently. "Perhaps they do not understand the magnitude of what's coming." Still, the commander's unease grew. He had led countless campaigns, destroyed empires that dwarfed humanity's potential, and yet, this felt different. The human response was unnerving, if only because it didn't match the panic they had expected. "They've seen our ships, haven't they?" the commander asked aloud. "Yes, sir," came the reply. "Their satellites are observing us now. There's no doubt they know. Then why aren't they scrambling for diplomacy? Why aren't they begging for mercy?" He stared at the screens as if they might offer an answer. The rest of the fleet awaited his orders, but the silence from Earth was too strange, too calm. "Do we deploy now?" his second-in-command questioned. "Hold position," the commander ordered. "I want to see what they do next." A few moments later, a new stream of data flooded in. The humans had activated their defensive systems, old, archaic systems. Large, metallic cannons rotated into place on the surface, launching heavy artillery rounds into the sky. Their air forces were scrambling, with jet engines howling in the atmosphere. To the Quorites, it all looked like the desperate flailing of an outmatched prey. The crew laughed at the absurdity. How could such a primitive species hope to survive? It was beyond reason. "Look at that! They still use combustion engines," an officer pointed out, laughing. The commander watched closely, still feeling that tug of uncertainty. They were missing something. He knew it. Humanity's confidence didn't make sense. "What's their plan?" he muttered to himself, pacing. The alien fleet held its position, just outside Earth's atmosphere, watching and waiting. Even as the Quorite drones scanned Earth's defenses, the humans appeared unbothered. They had prepared their outdated defenses, and then nothing. No further action. Just readiness. The silence stretched on, and the commander finally gave the order. "Prepare the bombardment. Let's end this." The fleet activated their weapons, plasma turrets charging with a hum that vibrated through the ship's hull. The Quorites were about to deliver the opening blow of a war that shouldn't have lasted longer than a few minutes. But still, in the back of the commander's mind, a question lingered: why weren't they afraid? The tension in the human command center was palpable, but it wasn't fear that filled the air, it was determination. General Harris stood at the front of the room, arms crossed, staring at the holographic display of the Quarite fleet hovering just beyond Earth's atmosphere. Everyone knew the situation was dire. The Quarites were far beyond humanity in terms of technology. Their plasma shields, quantum drives, and advanced weaponry made Earth's arsenal look like relics from another age. But Harris wasn't deterred. They think we're weak because we don't use plasma weapons. They think we're idiots for relying on what they call dumb weapons, Harris said, turning to his team of military leaders and strategists. But that's exactly what's going to give us the edge. Colonel Reed, a tactical expert, nodded in agreement. They've never fought anyone like us before. They expect us to rely on advanced tech to play by their rules. We won't. We'll hit them where they're vulnerable, where they won't expect it. The room was filled with hardened men and women who had served in countless military campaigns, yet none had ever faced an opponent like the Quarites. Still, there was a sense of calm, a quiet confidence. Humanity had always been an underdog, and they'd learned to adapt to situations where survival seemed impossible. Harris tapped the screen, pulling up a blueprint of Earth's defenses. We've got outdated weapons, sure. But the key is, they don't know how to fight against them. We're going to use every so-called dumb weapon we've got and force them into a fight they can't predict. Reed took over, explaining the plan to the assembled leaders. Our missiles, railguns, and ballistic weaponry are all analog. The Quarites rely on systems that are designed to counter energy-based attacks, which means their shields aren't prepared for physical projectiles. They think they've hacked into our systems, but we've got a few tricks up our sleeve. The strategy was simple in its brilliance. While the Quarites had spent centuries perfecting energy weapons and plasma-based defenses, humanity had mastered the art of chaos. Earth's militaries were preparing to deploy older, non-digital weapons, projectiles that couldn't be intercepted by the Quarites' advanced shielding and hacking systems. Reed continued, We'll start with a barrage of ballistic missiles. They'll think we're desperate. But the key is to make them believe that these attacks are our only shot. We need to draw them in, get them to commit to a ground assault. And when they do, Harris added, we hit them with something even more basic. EMPs to knock out their tech, low-tech drones packed with explosives, and good old-fashioned artillery. They won't see it coming. The plan was bold, almost reckless, but it was rooted in one simple truth: the Quarites were overconfident. They were so reliant on their superior technology that they couldn't imagine a scenario in which humans could pose a serious threat. A younger officer in the back of the room, Lieutenant Davis, raised a question that had been lingering in the minds of many. General, what if they adapt faster than we expect? What if they realize what we're doing? Harris didn't hesitate. They won't. Not in time. Their entire military doctrine is built on their tech superiority. We're going to blindside them before they have a chance to adjust. Reed chimed in. Their greatest weakness is their arrogance. They think we're primitive because we don't have the kind of weapons they do. But we're not going to fight the way they expect. We're going to fight smart, not with more advanced tech, but with better tactics. The room quieted for a moment as the gravity of the situation settled in. They were about to go up against an enemy that outclassed them in every measurable way, except one: human ingenuity. Every conflict we've ever faced, Harris said, pacing in front of the display, has taught us that victory doesn't go to the side with the biggest guns or the most advanced technology. It goes to the side that adapts, that outthinks their opponent. The Quarites may have the firepower, but we've got the brains. The team began finalizing preparations. Engineers worked on adapting old weapons systems, modifying drones, and preparing the EMP devices that would disable the Quarite ships. Pilots ran simulations, practicing maneuvers that would bait the Quarite forces into overextending themselves. Soldiers packed non-lethal gas canisters, knowing that incapacitating the enemy would give them a crucial advantage in close combat. As the countdown to the Quarite attack ticked down, the sense of urgency in the command center grew. But it wasn't panic. There was a strange calm among the humans, a shared understanding that this was their chance to show the galaxy what humanity was truly capable of. Harris turned back to his team one last time before the assault began. "We've been underestimated before. This time won't be any different. We may not have the tech they do, but we've got something better, our will to survive. And that's something no alien fleet can take away from us." Reed gave the signal, and across the globe, humanity's defenses came online. Ballistic missiles were loaded into silos, railguns were charged, and old artillery was prepped for the upcoming battle. It wasn't the sleek, cutting-edge weaponry of the Korrites, but it was enough. The humans were ready. Now all that was left was to wait for the Korrites to make their move. The Korrite fleet opened fire, their plasma cannons lighting up the sky as they rained destruction down on Earth's military installations. From their vantage point in orbit, it was a display of power, an unmistakable declaration that the Korrites were not to be trifled with. The humans' response, or rather lack of one, only served to confirm their superiority in the minds of the Korrite commanders. They had expected more resistance, but so far, nothing posed a serious threat. The first wave of human ballistic missiles launched, streaking toward the alien ships with primitive propulsion, solid fuel engines pushing them through the upper atmosphere. The Korrite officers watched the incoming projectiles with amusement. These were not the advanced, plasma-based weapons they were used to. These were crude, physical missiles, things they hadn't had to deal with in centuries. "They're actually using ballistic missiles," one Korrite officer sneered, watching the blips on his screen with disdain. "How quaint." The commander didn't even flinch. "Let them try," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Our shields will handle this." The Korrites watched, confident their advanced technology would neutralize the incoming threat. Their plasma shields were designed to absorb energy, dissipating it harmlessly. But the moment the first missile hit, something unexpected happened. Nothing. No absorption, no energy deflection. The missile slammed into the Korrite cruiser's shield with full force, delivering a kinetic punch that rattled the ship. The commander blinked, confused. "What just happened?" A second missile followed, then a third. Their shields, designed for energy-based attacks, had no response to the raw physical impact. The Korrite defenses were sophisticated, yes, but not invincible. Their arrogance had blinded them to the possibility that something as simple as mass and momentum could break through. "Adjust the shields," one officer shouted, scrambling at the control panels. But it was too late. The humans had timed their attack perfectly. The missiles, considered obsolete by modern standards, were ripping through the Korrite ranks with unexpected force. The commander's eyes narrowed as realization dawned. "They're exploiting our technology's weakness." Panic rippled through the alien fleet as more missiles closed in, followed by high-speed projectiles from human railguns. The Korrite ships, once thought untouchable, found themselves on the receiving end of a relentless barrage of kinetic energy. These weren't plasma blasts or energy beams. These were solid, high-velocity chunks of metal designed to tear through any material they hit. "How are they penetrating our shields?" a Korrite officer demanded, his voice tinged with disbelief. No one had an answer. The humans had caught them off guard, using tactics so simple, so outdated, that the Korrites hadn't prepared for them at all. The fleet's automated defenses, which could intercept energy weapons with ease, struggled to lock onto the physical projectiles. The missiles weren't guided by sophisticated computers. They were analog, beyond the reach of Korrite hacking. The railgun slugs, moving faster than sound, left no time for the alien ships to adjust. The commander's earlier confidence evaporated as he watched the carnage unfold. One of the Korrite cruisers took a direct hit to its hull, an explosion ripping through its structure, sending debris spiraling into space. This wasn't supposed to happen. The humans weren't supposed to have any real chance against their superior technology. "Sir, we need to adapt. Our shields aren't calibrated for these kinds of attacks," an officer said, his voice rising with desperation. The commander slammed his fist on the control panel. "Then recalibrate them." But recalibrating the shields took time they didn't have. The humans had launched their assault with perfect timing, overwhelming the Quarites before they could respond. More ships took hits, their shields faltering against the relentless barrage. Back on Earth, the humans watched as their seemingly outdated weapons wreaked havoc on the alien fleet. What the Quarites saw as primitive had turned out to be the perfect counter to their high-tech defenses. It wasn't just about firepower. It was about using the right tool for the right job. The commander's mind raced as more data came in. The humans were using technology that, by Quorite standards, was laughably inferior. And yet, here they were, dismantling the most advanced fleet in the galaxy. It was a blow to the Quorites' pride, a species that had never once considered the possibility that they could be outsmarted by something as simple as a missile. "They've forced us into a position where our technology is useless," the commander muttered. "They're not fighting with strength, they're fighting with strategy." Another Quorite ship exploded in the distance, a victim of yet another human missile. The realization hit the commander like a blow to the chest. They hadn't prepared for this. Their entire doctrine was built around superior technology, assuming their enemies would either match them in sophistication or perish trying. But humanity wasn't playing by those rules. "They're exploiting every weakness we didn't know we had," the commander said through gritted teeth. "We underestimated them." More missiles slammed into the fleet, and the Quorite defenses buckled under the pressure. Their ships, designed to absorb energy and deflect lasers, crumbled against the sheer force of physical impact. The commander watched helplessly as his once unstoppable fleet was systematically dismantled by a species he had dismissed as primitive. They had been so certain of their victory, so sure that their technology would carry the day. And now, as ship after ship fell to Earth's dumb weapons, that certainty was crumbling. "They baited us," the commander realized, his voice barely a whisper. "They wanted us to think they were weak." For the first time in his career, the Quorite commander felt a flicker of fear. The humans had outmaneuvered them, not with superior firepower, but with tactics that exploited their arrogance. They had underestimated Earth's adaptability, its ingenuity, and now they were paying the price. "Retreat!" the commander finally ordered, his voice trembling with rage and disbelief. "We need to regroup." But it was too late. The humans had already set the stage for their victory, and the Quorites, for all their technological superiority, were left scrambling to survive. The retreat order was given, but the Quorite fleet was in disarray. Their systems, so reliant on advanced technology, were struggling to keep up with the sudden barrage of low-tech human weaponry. Quorite ships, once maneuvering with surgical precision, now scrambled erratically, evading railgun slugs and missile strikes that should have been irrelevant in a modern battlefield. Down on Earth, the human forces pressed their advantage. The initial phase of the plan had worked, but this was only the beginning. The real chaos was about to unfold. General Harris stood in the command center, watching as the Quorite ships shifted into defensive positions, clearly rattled by the human assault. It was time to unleash the next stage of the strategy. Low-tech drones, packed with explosives and fitted with analog control systems, were deployed. These drones weren't sleek or fast, but they didn't need to be. Their strength lay in their simplicity. With no digital systems to hack, the Quorites had no way to intercept or disable them remotely. They were forced to rely on their point defense systems, but by now, the humans had overloaded those as well. The drones swarmed into the air, moving erratically and unpredictably. The Quorite ships, with their advanced targeting algorithms, found it nearly impossible to lock onto them. A few lucky shots brought some of the drones down, but the rest closed the distance, detonating against hulls and tearing through alien armor. The Quorite commanders were at a loss. They had anticipated energy weapons, plasma blasts, perhaps even some form of advanced AI-controlled war machines. What they hadn't expected were explosives strapped to drones, flying at them in chaotic swarms. The humans were fighting like savages, and yet, it was working. On the ground, human soldiers moved into action. They had waited for this moment, knowing the Quorites would never expect to engage in ground combat. The aliens had always relied on their superior firepower from above, believing that they'd never need to set foot on the planets they conquered. But now, with their ships damaged and their systems disrupted, they had no choice but to land their troops. The first wave of Quorite soldiers descended in sleek pods, hitting the ground in formation, their plasma rifles drawn. They were trained in combat, but only in the type of warfare they had perfected over centuries. Quick, decisive strikes from a distance, overwhelming their enemies with superior firepower. They had never faced anything like what was waiting for them. Human soldiers, armed with low-tech firearms and improvised explosives, launched their counterattack. The Quorites, expecting to dominate the battlefield with their plasma rifles, found themselves facing guerrilla tactics. The humans moved in small, agile units, using cover, setting traps, and launching surprise attacks that left the Quorites disoriented. Quorite plasma rifles fired beams of energy, but the humans had already anticipated this. Their troops wore reflective armor, not advanced enough to deflect the shots entirely, but enough to reduce the lethality. The Quorites, trained to rely on their plasma weapons, were stunned when their shots didn't cut down their enemies as expected. They weren't prepared for a battle of attrition, and the humans exploited this at every turn. EMP devices were deployed, sending out pulses that disrupted the Quorite soldiers' advanced equipment. Their helmets flickered, their rifles powered down momentarily, and in those brief windows of vulnerability, human soldiers struck. Simple grenades, well-placed gunfire, and even crude melee weapons became devastatingly effective. The Quorites couldn't comprehend what was happening. They had never been forced into this kind of close-quarters combat. Their training had focused on dominating from a distance, using their superior technology to annihilate enemies before they ever got close. But the humans had closed that distance, forcing them into a fight they weren't equipped to handle. As the battle raged, the Quorites grew more desperate. Their tactics, once precise and calculated, became increasingly erratic. Human soldiers continued their relentless assault, using everything at their disposal, anything that could create confusion or panic among the aliens. Smoke grenades, flashbangs, and psychological warfare tactics turned the battlefield into a chaotic nightmare for the Quorites. They had expected to overpower the humans easily, but instead, they were the ones struggling to survive. The ground they had once confidently claimed was now littered with debris, smoke, and the bodies of their fallen soldiers. For the first time in their history, the Quorites were on the defensive. The human forces pressed on, knowing that momentum was on their side. Every inch of ground gained was a blow to the Quorites' morale. Every Quorite soldier that fell was a reminder that their technological superiority was meaningless in the face of human adaptability and sheer willpower. Quorite Command, watching from their damaged ships, could see the writing on the wall. Their forces were being overwhelmed, not by superior firepower, but by the humans' refusal to play by the rules. The humans fought with grit, using whatever they had at their disposal to turn the tide of battle in their favor. The Quorite fleet, now heavily damaged and unable to provide effective support, was forced to retreat further into space. Their ground forces, cut off from reinforcements, were left to fend for themselves. Human soldiers continued their relentless pursuit, picking off the remaining Quorite troops one by one. The battle that had once seemed destined for a swift Quorite victory had turned into a humiliating defeat. The humans had turned the Quorites' greatest strength, their reliance on advanced technology, into a crippling weakness. And now, as the alien soldiers were driven into full retreat, it was clear that humanity had won the day, not through superior weapons, but through superior strategy. By the time the Quorites regrouped, it was too late. Their forces had been decimated, their ships crippled, and their pride shattered. The remnants of the Quorite fleet limped away from Earth's orbit, their once mighty armada shattered by what they had considered an inferior species. The silence aboard the command ship was palpable, as the crew, once brimming with arrogance, now struggled to comprehend what had gone wrong. They had lost, not to a technological equal, but to a race that had used outdated, dumb, weapons. The commander stood at the helm, staring at the damage reports that scrolled across the screen. Ship after ship had been reduced to wreckage, their defenses torn apart by ballistic missiles and railgun slugs, things that shouldn't have been a threat. His pride, along with the fleet, had been decimated. And yet, more than the loss of ships, it was the humans' audacity that gnawed at him. They had dared to fight back, dared to use weapons the Quarites had long since abandoned, and somehow, they had won. He tapped into the remaining communications network, sending a transmission to Quarite High Command. It was a report no commander ever wanted to make, especially not after centuries of victories. His message was short and grim. We have underestimated them. Humans are not the primitives we thought. Back on Earth, the human commanders and soldiers were coming to terms with their victory. The aftermath of the battle was a mix of relief and exhaustion, but there was also a sense of pride. Against all odds, they had not only survived, but they had triumphed over an enemy that should have been unstoppable. In a briefing room deep within one of Earth's military bases, General Harris addressed his team. The weight of what they had accomplished was still settling in. The room was quiet as he spoke. They'll be back, he said, not as a warning, but as a fact. The Quarites won't forget this. But now they know we're not as helpless as they thought. They'll think twice before underestimating us again. Colonel Reed, still catching his breath from the intensity of the battle, added, We fought them with everything they didn't expect. They relied on their technology to win wars for them. That's their weakness. They think technology is everything. We showed them that tactics, creativity, and sheer determination matter just as much, if not more. The victory wasn't just a matter of outsmarting the Quarites. It was a testament to humanity's resilience. They had taken an enemy that outclassed them in every measurable way and turned the fight into one they could win. It wasn't about having the most advanced weapons. It was about using the right strategy. The soldiers, many of whom had doubted whether they would make it through the battle, now stood a little taller. They had fought in ways that seemed reckless on paper, outdated weapons, analog systems, and guerrilla tactics, but it had all worked. They had adapted in ways the Quarites couldn't. But the war wasn't over. The Quarites had retreated, but they hadn't been wiped out. They'd regroup, analyze their failures, and likely come back stronger. The human military knew this. There was no room for complacency. The battle had been a victory, but it had also been a warning. The next time, the Quarites wouldn't make the same mistakes. They'll adapt, just like we did, Harris said, his tone measured. But we'll be ready for them. And when they come, we'll be even stronger. The room filled with a quiet determination. The soldiers and commanders knew what was at stake. They weren't fighting just for territory or resources. They were fighting for their survival, and humanity had always thrived under pressure. As word of the victory spread, the general populace of Earth reacted with a mix of shock and elation. Many had feared the worst when the Quorite fleet arrived, knowing how advanced the alien species was. But the unexpected had happened. The seemingly primitive defenses had held, and Earth had pushed back an intergalactic power. The Quorites, for their part, were left reeling. They had never faced a defeat like this. Their military doctrine, so reliant on superior firepower and technology, had been utterly upended. It wasn't just a loss, it was a humiliation. They had been outwitted by a species they had written off as insignificant. Among the Quorite High Command, discussions were already underway. The humans would need to be reevaluated, their tactics studied in depth. No longer could they be considered a minor species on the fringes of the galaxy. They were a force, and one that had to be taken seriously. Back aboard the command ship, the Quorite commander replayed the battle in his mind, analyzing every step where it had gone wrong. He had underestimated them. They all had. The humans had turned their supposed weaknesses into strengths, using tactics so basic that the Quorites had never considered them a threat. As the last damaged ships limped away from Earth's atmosphere, the commander sent a final transmission to his superiors. We cannot treat them as primitives. They fight with tactics we've never encountered. Their weapons may be crude, but their minds are dangerous. We must adapt, or they will continue to outmaneuver us. On Earth, the human military continued to prepare. The victory had been a moment of pride, but it was also a wake-up call. They had shown the galaxy what humanity was capable of, but they knew the Quorites would return. This time, they would come prepared. As General Harris looked out over the horizon, watching the last traces of the Quorite fleet disappear into the sky, He knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The humans had sent a message to the galaxy. They wouldn't be conquered easily. "We're just getting started," Harris muttered to himself, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth.